if you're living in America today, chances are you know someone who falls outside of the gender binary, someone who is non-binary or genderqueer. A majority of people who are non-binary use they, them, theirs as their pronoun. So let's talk a little bit about the why and the how of gender-neutral pronouns. So first of all, a gender-neutral pronoun is simply a pronoun other than he or she. Throughout modern history, there have been a wide variety of third gender pronouns that have been used. But in the past 10 years or so, the pronoun they, them, theirs has been the most frequently used one. The reason is because we already use they, them, theirs in American English all the time. Like if you were to say, oh no, someone left their bag here, you're already doing it. So this is just an expansion of its use when you don't know the gender of the person that you're currently talking about. So why might someone want to use a gender-neutral pronoun? Well, it's kind of hard to come up with a perfect analogy to explain what it feels like to have someone use the wrong pronoun for you. So I'll just start with a personal story. For myself, there was a period of time in my life when I absolutely knew I was transgender. I knew I was a man. I had not transitioned. And that meant that the whole world saw me as a woman, with short hair, dressed in men's clothes, but they still saw me as a woman. And those years of my life were the most excruciating. It was incredibly difficult to navigate the world, knowing that something was true about myself and have it be invisible to everyone else. So I can only say for myself that it was really difficult to try to show up and be my full self and do a good job at work and be a good partner and a good friend when I was constantly being berated by the fact that people didn't see who I really was and kept calling me the wrong thing. The other way that I can explain why it's important to call people by the right pronoun is if you've ever tried to write with your non-dominant hand, so I'm right-handed, if you put a pen in my left hand and tell me to write with it, I can't do it. The writing looks bad, but also I can't focus on what I'm trying to convey with my words. The whole thing is so awkward that all I can really think about is getting the pen back into my right hand. And that kind of cognitive dissonance, that's what it feels like for me when you use the wrong pronoun for me. Whether that's calling me she or calling a transgender woman he, or using he or she for a person who uses they, that feeling of being awkward and feeling forced to do something that is wrong, that's what it feels like for us. All of a sudden, we can't actually hear what you're asking us to do or what you want to talk to us about. So whether you're a partner or a coworker or a boss or a doctor, that thing, the wrong pronoun, takes up all the space in the room, and it stands in the way between you and the person that you're trying to communicate with. So if you are someone who wants to use the right pronoun for someone, but as you've just been finding it a little bit difficult, if you're getting stuck in a shame spiral, well, good news, I'm here to help. I have a 3-step process that should get you well on your way to using the right pronouns. So number 1, if you do make a mistake, and you will make a mistake, do not go down that shame spiral. The problem is that you're actually in the process of retraining your brain. And if you look at the science around the neuroplasticity of the brain, we know that physically speaking, the language that we use shapes the nooks and crannies of our brain, not metaphorically, but physically, our brains. The language we use, those neurons fire together and then wire together. So you've spent your whole life looking at groups of people and calling them they, looking at masculine people calling them he, feminine people calling them she. Your brain has wired that way. What you're asking your brain to do is to loosen those connections and then rewire into some new ones. It's possible, but it is a process. The neuroplasticity of the brain never goes away, no matter how old you are. So anyone can do it at any time, but it's a process. So if you start to go down that shame spiral, what happens is your brain gets flooded with stress hormones, which makes it much more difficult to rewire and make new connections. So you're going to need to be graceful. You're going to need to give yourself a little bit of forgiveness so that you can actually learn and grow. The other reason this is really important is because the trans people in your life may not have the capacity to give you that grace and forgiveness that your brain needs in order to keep learning and growing. To be a trans person today is probably more complicated and difficult than even the most aware cisgender person can really understand, especially if you layer on racism for trans people of color, sexism for transgender women. We're all carrying our own burden of transphobia and sometimes also sexism and racism every single day. We may not have the ability to show you this grace and forgiveness that you need. And also, it's not really our job to do that. So you're going to have to give it to yourself because you're going to need it for your process. So number 2, how do you actually retrain your brain? Well, if you're like me and you're embarrassed easily and you don't want to practice a lot out loud, either to a stranger or to yourself, the cool thing about this process is you don't have to actually use the words verbally for your brain to rewire itself to new connections. So you can just use your internal monologue and practice using the right name and pronoun for whatever person you're thinking of. So if you're a doctor and you have a patient that you know is coming to the office that day, you can just practice on your way to the work, in the bus, on the bike, or your car. You can talk about them in your head. So you can say, I'm really looking forward to seeing my patient Joe today. They always wear those cool bow ties. They have such a calm and pleasant demeanor. Or if you have a colleague who's a trans person or a non-binary person, I'm really excited to see Stefan today. They always bring such cool ideas to our team meetings. That's it. And you just do it over and over again in your head, to and from meetings with people while you're taking a lunch break, whatever. Just in your head thinking about that person with that name and that pronoun. And then sure enough, as time goes by, you will be able to use gender-neutral pronouns, not just for that individual, but in general. It gets easier and easier over time. After a while, you can use gender-neutral pronouns or switch someone's name into a new name very, very easily without even thinking about it. It's not a muscle that gets stronger. It's more like riding a bike. Once you've learned it, it's there forever. So number 3, making it right. If you do make a mistake, because you feel guilty about that mistake, your instinct might be to try and actually change the power dynamic between you and the person that you've maybe upset so that they're comforting you. So that you can feel a little bit like you're off the hook. You can feel a little bit less guilty or ashamed that you made a mistake. And the problem with that, of course, is that you're not then apologizing, you're asking for their forgiveness. And those are 2 very different things. One thing that has happened to me as a trans person is someone, like, they'll call me by the wrong name or the wrong pronoun, then they will start doing what I call the apology parade. So they'll be like, oh my God, I'm just so sorry. It's just that, I just work with women. Please stop. Whatever excuse you have it's not a good one. I know to you it feels like context and an explanation for what you're doing, but what actually happens is the power dynamic shifts, right? So now, instead of you trying to make me feel better, I'm put in the position of having to make you feel better, which is not how apologies are supposed to go. So if you do make a mistake, correct yourself quickly and then keep moving. That's it. So you could just say, I'm sorry, I mean they, and then you just keep moving. It is important, however, to not ignore it. Don't pretend it didn't happen, because it did happen. If you think that maybe they didn't notice, I don't like to speak in absolutes, but I promise you they noticed. Every trans person I have ever met has noticed every time someone messes up their pronoun. So they noticed. Correct yourself and then keep moving. Now, my 201 next level allyship tip that you can take or leave as whatever feels best for you. You can pull the person aside later, not in front of anyone, but one-on-one, and you can go the extra mile and say, hey, by the way, I want you to know that I did notice that I messed up earlier. I'm working on it. I've found that extra step can go a long way to rebuilding that relationship. Just saying, I know I made a mistake, I promise I'm on it. And then you have to make sure that you are actually on it. Thank you so much for going on this pronoun journey with me. Don't forget, don't shame yourself. Practice in your head, and if you make a mistake, just make it right. Don't throw an apology parade. Keep moving. Pull them aside later if you really feel inclined to.